There is a group that has malice aforethought and has planned to launch these assets in a way that would look like 100% like an attack on our planet or on human assets, calling it alien when it's being run by people. I call it the Wizard of Oz. So you have these guys, you know, it's like the Wizard of Oz, remember at the end, they pull the curtain back and there's this old crudmudgeon pulling all the levers, scaring the hell out of Dorothy. And I call it the Wizard of Oz effect. But it's very sophisticated, and we should not underestimate their capacity. Back some years ago, I hosted in Washington, prior to the National Press Club event in 2001, a private briefing for Congress that was at the Westin Hotel in Georgetown. And there were a number of people there and chairmen of committees. And Edgar Mitchell was there as my guest. He's passed on now. And one of the gentlemen who was there was a man who had been on an interagency committee in 1974. Now this is 42 years ago. And the testimony he was going to provide to those members of Congress and other people, there was a science advisor for Vice President Al Gore there, all kinds of folks, was that we had this capability I'm telling you about today in November of 2016, and that all they would have to do is push a button, boom, and the entire event would roll out. And he said everyone on planet Earth would be fooled. Now, if I had heard that only from one person, I would have discounted it as madness. I've heard it from one person after another, after another, after another, after another, on a granular level. And now we have an Air Force Office of Special Investigations counterintelligence officer confirming the false flag operations. But he would not discuss, he says, that's still very secret, that's very secret, I can't talk about that. We have it on camera, jumping out of his skin, because I asked the question in a way that he understood. Do you know about the deceptive INWs and the false INWs? No one else running the cameras knew what that term meant. He did. This is in the film. Now, what happens then when you have a black operation that is so secretive that they could pull off a stunt like this? It means they could stampede the entire world into an Independence Day, like the movie, event. Has this already been beta tested? Yes. So they beta tested and have been testing on the public sightings that are man-made UFOs, often piggybacking on sightings of actual ET craft, so that people are confused, don't have any discernment. They've also been involved in using first the stagecraft of little people, and I mean no offense to short people. I know sometimes people get prickly when I talk about this, I'm 6'4", but special operations folks who are under 5 feet and with certain makeup and masks on these anti-gravities who would go then and abduct people. So there have been abduction squads, which are also confirmed by this Air Force intelligence officer, that have been operative for decades. And when it has suited the intelligence community, they have engaged in human abductions that 100% fool those poor victims who really think they were abducted by an ET. And they weren't, but it sure looks like it. Now there are two modalities used here. The aircraft itself, which is an anti-grav. The stagecraft initially were special operations personnel who now they have robotic ones that look actually like certain species of ETs, extraterrestrial biological entities in the EBINs. But they're man-made. I know several people who worked on making these creatures, and they've been called programmed life forms. But they have integrated circuits in their neural complex. They're 100% man-made. But they would fake, they would absolutely fool 99.999999 to out to 100 decimal points anyone in the public that it was extraterrestrial. Those are fully operational, have been for decades. The early ones were these more clumsy attempts. It's also done in association with electromagnetic weapon systems that alter awareness, can make you black out, and also certain chemicals, drugs, canisters that'll be thrown, and the person will then pass out, have no memory of what happened, and then awaken with this other event happen, having been abducted by an extraterrestrial. A lot of people have said, oh, Dr. Greer says no one's ever been abducted. I said, yeah, they have. And they attempted to abduct me out of my hotel room at the St. Moritz Hotel in July of 1994 when I met with Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein. So I'm one of those victims. I know what they're capable of. The difference with me is that I knew what it was. Now this gets more complex. And we haven't scratched the surface. And I don't know how disturbed you are yet, but it's going to get worse. Take a deep breath. So in 1989, there was a guy named Mikhail Gorbachev, who was head of the Soviet Union. And then during that period of the Bush era, President Bush, George H.W. Bush, not W, but George H.W., elder, who had been CIA director. And he was a mid-level person on this MAGIC committee, Majority Intelligence Committee, or Majestic. And he and Gorbachev and Paris de Cuellar, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations, and others were planning to disclose that we weren't alone in an event, a disclosure event. In November of 1989, Paris de Cuellar was abducted out of his motorcade at about 3 a.m. in New York City by aliens. Now, I put in parentheses aliens, meaning human assets. And he was taken and on board this human-controlled abduction event and told that if he were to continue with that plan, that the aliens would abduct everyone involved, including the President of the United States. And Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein told me this personally because he was personal friends with Paris de Cuellar, the UN Secretary General. And the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein said to me, this is why I don't believe you'll be successful at disclosing the extraterrestrial presence. And I just smiled and I said, well, I believe you have it backwards. And he did not know, this was in July of 1994, of the ability of the intelligence community to set up a hoax of someone like a world figure, political figure like the head of the United Nations. That actually happened. Now, because of that, Gorbachev, Bush Sr., the president, Paris de Cuellar, and others involved canceled the plans to let the public know we weren't alone, because they were concerned that, and I was told, and I'm quoting by Prince Hans von Liechtenstein, that this blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House, and they said, we're staying out of this now. And ever since then, no one in that office has wanted to deal with this, because they don't know what's ET and now what's human. And the stagecraft and the ability to interfere with plans by people who are congressmen or UN secretary generals or presidents is so great that none of them want to risk that happening to them. Because in those elite circles, trust me, because I've been in meetings, those folks don't want that to happen to them. Or worse. This is why, you know, when I got this information to President Bill Clinton via his CIA director, 2 months or a month later, a very good friend of the Clinton family came to my home and said, well, they really support what you're recommending, but they're afraid that if President Clinton does this, he will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I laughed. I thought he was joking. And he says, what are you laughing at? I'm being serious. This guy was a jokester, sort of bag man for the Democratic Party, fundraiser. And I said, well, if that's true, we really are in trouble. Now that was in January 1994. And you can see why between December of 1993 and the summer of 1994 I was canceling my involvement in this subject. I had to be begged to stay in it because this is very difficult. So this is how long I've known this. So I think that my problem personally, and I'm saying it as a man, one fallible human, is who do I share this with and when and how, with what detail? I am only scratching the surface. And because of what has been happening with the WikiLeaks, with John Podesta's emails about UFOs, the New York Times reporting on Hillary's interest in it, which was a red line subject, the mainstream media starting to report it, they are being unleashed. To me, there are signs out there that this false flag hoaxing of an attack on the planet is closer than it's been in 22 years that I've been involved. Now, the gentleman who had this story to tell and who was an official on the interagency committee dealing with this specifically, who was going to testify in front of these members of Congress at that private meeting I set up in 1997, he told me that this was the most difficult thing he'd ever done because he felt like he was betraying some of his brothers in the intelligence community, but he felt the world needed to know. That night, he was sequestered out of the Westin Hotel by people who he had worked with back in the 70s and taken to an undisclosed location out in Virginia, and he never returned, and we've never heard from him since. He left a note under my assistant's door, Sherry Adamak, saying that I have to leave. The people who I've worked with are begging me not to go forward with this testimony, and they are begging for time for them to get this under control and stand it down. Unfortunately, I do not think he succeeded. I think these rogue elements have prevailed since 1997. It's almost 20 years later. And for that reason, we are in mortal danger of being deceived by this. Now, am I saying that all people who have had contact with ETs have been abducted by humans? No. I'm saying, though, that if you have trillions of dollars and the kind of technologies I've been referring to, and you have the intent to masquerade and simulate an alien contact abduction event, you can do it. So that is one of the chief issues that we have to begin to think about. What part of what we hear about in the UFO and internet and movies and books is ET, interstellar? What part is counterintelligence and propaganda and conditioning events by the intelligence community and by the deep, 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 darkest parts of this rogue community that have betrayed the United States and every other country on earth? Well, I'm telling you that their stagecraft, as they call it, is so good that there are very few people who would not be deceived by it. Which means that we have to approach every account we hear, every event that happens, with extraordinary, scrupulous skepticism. And we are not being skeptical enough. Now, I know I'm building a very long bridge for you to go over, and I apologize for that. And it's not my fault that you've been lied to for 70 years. As I was preparing to come here, my sort of gut check on this is that what is the right thing for me to do? And that is to send up a call, like Paul Revere. The British are coming. Well, the British are fine now, but this is coming. And let's not get fooled again.